Hello and welcome to the results of the F1 First Predictions Challenge for 2025. I am once again Sosh and I am going to be running you through all the questions and announcing the winner of this year's challenge. This year we had 24 entrants who, before the first 2025 Formula 1 car had even turned a wheel in testing, made some predictions about how the 2025 Formula 1 season would unfold. There were a total of 36 questions across 9 rounds, with a maximum of 546 points available on the table. Like last year, you can track your score using the timing tower on the left. So to start us off, the first section is starters for 10, 6 questions where each correct answer scores you up to 10 points. So, question 1. Who will be the World Drivers' Champion? Lando Norris sealed his maiden World Drivers' Championship this year, with Verstappen second and Piastri third. 10 of us successfully predicted this correctly and gained the full 10 points. 3 thought Verstappen would win and net 6 points. 5 of you guessed Piastri and get 4 points, 3 for Leclerc with 2 points and 3 for Hamilton earning a single point. Everyone scored points on this question. So, next question, who will come last in the World Drivers' Championship? While both Jack Doohan and Franco Colapinto failed to score any points in 2025, Colapinto's 11th place finish at Zandvoort means that Doohan holds the unenviable title of coming last in the World Drivers' Championship in 2025. 6 people correctly guessed Doohan for 10 points. 7 of us predicted someone else, which in this case is Colapinto, for 6 points. 6 people guessed Bortoleto and gained 4 points, and 2 people guessed Lance Stroll and get 1 point each. There were 3 non-scorers in this round. 2 for Isaac Hadjar, who finished 12th, and 1 for Nico Hülkenberg, who finished 11th. So, question 3. Which team will win the World Constructors' Championship? McLaren retained their Constructors' Championship crown in 2025, finishing with 77% more points than second-placed Mercedes. 15 of us correctly predicted McLaren would win the Constructors' Championship and gain 10 points, and the other 9 of you guessed Ferrari, who came 4th in the World Constructors' Championship and get 3 points each. So for question 4, I asked you which team will come last in the World Constructors' Championship. Alpine finished the season last in the Constructors this year, with less than a third of the points of 9th place Sauber in front of them. 22 of us thought that Sauber would finish last for the second year in a row and get 6 points each. Coog was alone in thinking Haas would return to the bottom of the table and gets 4 points. Rusty was the only one to guess Williams, who would return to the bottom of the order, whereas in reality they were best of the rest in the midfield, so Rusty only gains 1 point. For question 5, I asked you which driver will get the most Driver of the Day awards. Max Verstappen received the most Driver of the Day awards in 2025, with 8 awards in total across the Saudi Arabian, Emilia-Romagna, Spanish, Italian, Brazilian, Las Vegas, Qatari and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Only Hobnob correctly guessed this and wins the full 10 points. Antonelli, Bortoleto, Leclerc and Hamilton each won 2 Driver of the Day awards, and as such the 9 who guessed one of them get 6 points. The remaining 14 votes were split between Alonso, Norris, Piastri and Sainz, who each received 1 Driver of the Day award each, and because second place was a 4-way tie, these predictions only gained 1 point each. So for the last question in this round, I asked which driver would get the F1 Overtake Award. The Overtake Award was again not a ranked award this year, so there's only 1 point scorer here, and that's Max Verstappen for his overtake on Oscar Piastri at the start of the race in Imola. Only Azure correctly predicted this outcome, and so gets the full 10 points. Of the non-scoring answers, only Piastri, Hamilton, Leclerc and Behrman were in contention for the win in the final poll. And moving on to the second round. In this round, I wanted you to predict the Drivers' Championship order after a certain number of races. First, the second, the 4th, the 8th and the 16th. This will use the same 1991 to 2002 F1 scoring system as last time. The first question was, who's going to be first in the championship after the first race? Effectively, who's going to win the Australian Grand Prix? Lando Norris was the winner of that rain-affected race, from Verstappen, Russell, Antonelli, Albon and Stroll, making our scoring drivers. 5 of you correctly predicted Lando for the full 10 points, and 7 predicted Max for 6 points. For the non-scoring answers, Oscar was 9th, Charles was 8th, and Lewis was 10th. So second in the championship after China was Max Verstappen, trailing Norris and in front of Russell. 4 of us correctly predicted Max and get the full 10 points, with 5 of you getting Lando for 6 points and another 5 for Oscar netting 4 points. Of the non-scoring answers, Charles was in 10th, after an 8th in Australia and a 5th in the Chinese sprint, and after being disqualified for plank wear in the Chinese Grand Prix. Lewis was 9th after his 10th in Australia and the Chinese sprint race win, before also being disqualified for plank wear in the Chinese Grand Prix. 4th in the championship after Bahrain was George Russell, trailing Verstappen and ahead of Leclerc. 4 of you correctly guessed George to win the 10 points. 2 guessed Max, and 5 of us guessed Charles for 6 points each. 2 guessed Oscar, and just 1 for Kimi get 4 points. And 8 Ferrari copium sufferers voted Lewis and get 3 points each. Of the non-scoring answers, Liam was 18th and yet to score any points. 8th in the championship after Monaco was Alex Albon with 42 points in total, behind Kimi Antonelli on 48 points and well ahead of Esteban Ocon on only 20 points. Nobody correctly predicted Albon, but 6 of us were 1 away and guessed Kimi for 6 points. Raf was alone with Isaac in 10th for 4 points, 3 of you were split between George and Carlos, and 2 went with Yuki in 13th to get the last point. Of the non-scoring answers, Lando was in 1st, Pierre was in 14th, Liam was in 17th, and both Fernando in 18th and Jack in 19th were yet to score any points. 16th in the championship after Monza was Gabriel Bortoletto on 18 points, just behind Lawson on 20 points and 2 points ahead of Behrman on 16th. Raf correctly guessed his compatriot Gabriel and scores the full De Ponton. Knight gets 6 points for Lawson in 15th, Arid gets 4 points for Sainz in 18th, Volps and Lee both get 3 points for Ocon in 13th and Yuki in 19th respectively. Rusty gets 2 points for Franco in 20th, and another 9 of you were spread between Franco and Jack for 1 point each. Of the non-scoring answers, Charles was in 5th, Nico was 10th, and Isaac was 9th. So, on to the third round. In this round, you had to tell me who you thought was going to win races and get podiums in 2025. You get 10 points for everyone you guess correctly, but you'll lose 5 points for each driver you incorrectly predict to score or ones who do that you didn't pick. So for the first question, I wanted you to name every driver who would get a race win in 2025. There were only 4 race winners in 2025, with Norris and Piastri both winning 7, Max winning 8, and George getting 2 wins. So this is how you all answered. It'd be far too messy to list every individual answer on the screen, so I've summarised how many you got right in green on the left of your icon, and how many you got wrong or missed in red to the right of your icon. The number over your face is then what you score for this round. Nobody's actually in the negatives here. So for the second question, I wanted you to name every driver to get a race podium finish. There were 9 podium finishes in total in F1 this year. Lando was on the podium most of anybody with 18 podiums in total, followed by Oscar with 16 podiums, Max with 15 podiums, George with 9, Charles with 7, Kimi with 3, Sainz with 2, and Hülkenberg and Hajar with 1 podium each. And this is how we all did for this particular question. Sadly, Rachel is the only one in the negatives this year, which drops her to the bottom of the order as it stands. And for the last question in this round, I wanted you to name every driver to get a race win. Like the regular Grand Prix, there were only 4 sprint race winners this year, even if there were a quarter as many sprints as Grand Prix. Lando and Max won 2 sprints apiece, with Oscar and Lewis winning the other 2. And this is how our predictions panned out. Some of you for this were forgetting that there are only 6 sprints in a year, and ticking 7 drivers. Moving on to the 4th round. In this section, we're looking at the inter-team battles. It's important to note that they only count for the driver lineups as they existed at the opening race in Australia. That means for Red Bull, Racing Bulls and Alpine, these results are only from a partial season. So for the first question, this is for McLaren. What will be the points difference between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in the sprint races? And despite winning 1 more sprint than Oscar, Lando's 8th place in the Chinese sprint means they actually average out 29 points apiece in the sprints this year. Rachel was the closest in this and gets 4 points for being 2 away, Raf gets 3 points for being 3 away, Hobnob and Twuff share 2 points, and Lee gets the final point. Most of us didn't score here, with a fairly good spread between 6 and 15 points away, with myself and Benji the outliers thinking that the difference would be much larger. So for the second question, this is for Ferrari. What will be the average difference in race qualifying times between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc? It is important to note that this average is calculated only from the sessions they all competed in. So if Lewis was knocked out in Q2, the comparison would be their fastest Q2 runs, not the time Charles would later do in Q3. The difference between Lewis and Charles over the course of the season was 0.274 seconds. 5 of you were 5 100ths either side and bagged the full 10 points. 8 of us get 6 points, 5 for 4 points, and 3 for 3 and 2 for 1 point. Rusty is the only non-scorer with a somewhat alarming 2.2 second predicted difference. It always pays to read the question. If the decimal place was 1 place further left, you'd have earned the full 10 points on this. For Red Bull, Lawson's demotion back to Racing Bulls at Japan for only the 3rd round of the season means this is an average made of only 2 races, Australia and China. It's clear that we all thought that Red Bull were finally onto a winner here and that Lawson would be a much closer fit with Max in the Red Bull than Checo had been. But alas, with an average finishing position of 3.5 against 13 in the opening 2 races, means the correct answer is rounded up to 10, with only Knight being the closest with 8 to grab 4 points. So, for the Mercedes question, I wanted to know how many crashes will Andrea Kimi Antonelli and George Russell have between them this year. Kimi and George had 8 crashes between each other this year, which nobody predicted correctly. But 4 of us were 1 away and earned 6 points, 4 more get 4 points for 2 away, 4 more get 3 points, 4 get 2, and 2 get 1 point. For the Aston Martin question, I wanted to know what will be the average difference in sprint qualifying times between Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. The difference between Fernando and Lance in sprint qualifying saw Fernando 0.334 seconds faster on average in all the sessions they competed in. 4 of us were 5 100ths either side and bagged the full 10 points. 6 more get 6 points, 2 get 4 points, 2 more get 3 points, Raf gets 2 points, and Volps gets 1 point. For the Alpine question, I wanted to know how many races would it be before Jack Doohan is replaced by Franco Colapinto. It took only 6 races for Colapinto's financial backing to oust Doohan from his race seat, which he wouldn't return to for the rest of the season. 3 people predicted this correctly and get the full 10 points. 5 of us believed the pre-season rumour mill exactly and gained 6 points, as to 2 others who were 1 over. 7 more get 4 points and 3 get 2. Rusty thought it would be 18 races, and 3 more thought Jack would actually finish the whole season. For the Haas question, I wanted to know how many points finishes Haas would manage in 2025. Nobody correctly predicted that Haas would have 18 points finishes this year, but Rusty was closest with 17 and gained 6 points, Lee gets 4 points, and RPM Guy gets 2 points. Of the non-scoring answers, most of us predicted between 3 and 12 points finishes, whereas Benji thought 28 and Volps thought Haas would score points in every possible situation where it was possible to score points, bar 3 times. For the Racing Bulls question, I wanted to know how many races would it be before the Racing Bulls driver lineup changes. Nobody correctly predicted the sheer speed that Helmut Marko would change his mind this year. In fact, nobody even got that close. Valian and Koog were closest with 6 races, and that nets them 2 points, while Benji and Twuth were 1 more away and get a point each. There was a good spread of non-scoring answers throughout the season, although 5 of us thought RB wouldn't change at all through the season, and Bond didn't think RB would change drivers until 2030-ish. For the Williams question, I wanted to know how many FIA Super License penalty points will Alexander Albon and Carlos Sainz accrue between them in 2025. Carlos earned 2 penalty points for forcing Antonelli off track in Bahrain, and 2 more for a collision again with Antonelli in Texas. Albon copped 2 penalty points for colliding with Colapinto in Azerbaijan, and a single point for colliding with Hamilton in Brazil. Hobnob correctly predicted 7 total penalty points for 2025 for the Williams pair, so gains the full 10 points. 6 for 1 away for 6 points, 6 more get 4 points, 4 get 3, and 3 get 1 point. A couple of you thought they'd be squeaky clean all season, and I imagine Volps just screed at the form and got interpreted as 621 points. And now for the last question this round, we went to Sauber. I asked what will be the difference in the average finishing position in the sprint races between Gabriel Bortoleto and Nico Hülkenberg. Bortoletto's average finishing position in the sprints was 13 2/3, rounded up to 14, and Hock's was 15th, so the average difference was just a single place. 2 of you predicted that exactly and get the full 10 points. Rusty gets 6 points, 7 of you get 4 points, and another 7 get 3 points. And 3 of you get 2 points, with 4 non-scorers in total. Moving on to the 5th round. In this round, I wanted you to pick 5 races, and then you'd earn Pierre Gasly's points from that race. Gasly finished mid-table in 2024, so that's why you get to win Gasly's points. This does not include sprint race points earned on the same weekend. As it happens, Gasly only scored points on 5 occasions, and that was the Bahrain, Spanish, British, Belgian, and Sao Paulo Grand Prix. This is how we all voted. Miami and Austria are tied with 4 Edison DNFs. Is the biggest beneficiary so far, scoring a total of 15 points ahead of Hobnob's 9. And moving on to the second half of the players, this is how you all voted. Nobody can catch Edison's total of 15, and the maximum possible score in this round was 20 points. Moving on to the 6th round, I wanted you to predict who would run the least laps in the sprint races and the regular races. This round is scored using the current F1 scoring system, so therefore the driver with the fewest laps earns 25 points, second fewest earns 18 points, and so on. In the first question, I wanted to know who would complete the least laps in the sprint races. Only competing in 2 sprints before being ousted from his seat, the correct answer here is Jack Doohan, with a total of 37 sprint laps completed. There wasn't a someone else option for this question, so Franco doesn't get to look in on this ranking. A strange second in this ranking would be Piastri, with his collision with Lando at the first corner in Texas and dropping it in damp conditions at turn 3 in Brazil means he only completed 76 laps, in total out of a possible 114. 13 of you correctly predicted Doohan and gained the full 25 points for this round, while 3 more thought Bortoleto, who only lost 1 lap in the sprints when he crashed heavily on the last lap in Brazil. Of the non-scoring answers, Antonelli, Hajar and Behrman completed all of the sprint laps available this year. And for the second question, I wanted you to predict who would get the least laps in the Grand Prix. Again, Doohan obviously completed the least laps in Grand Prix with a lowly total of 215 laps. The next least was Bortoleto with 1,229 laps, completed to a maximum possible of 1,444 laps. Conversely, the driver with the most laps this year was Russell, who managed 1,442 thanks to being lapped twice during the Monaco Grand Prix. 13 of you correctly predicted Doohan and gained the full 25 points, whereas 5 of you pick up 18 points for Bortoleto and 2 of us gain a point for Lance Stroll's 1,316 lap total. Of the non-scoring answers, Hajar completed 1,342 laps, Behrman 1,372 laps, and Tsunoda completed 1,386 laps. In the 7th round, I wanted you to predict which driver would suffer the most DNFs, and which race would also see the most DNFs. Drivers who make it to the grid but don't make the start, as in do not starts, also count. Drivers disqualified after the race or crash or break down after taking the checkered flag do not count. So for the first question, I wanted to know the driver with the most DNFs. With DNFs in the Australian, Chinese, Monaco, Italian, Mexico City Grand Prix, as well as the Miami and United States sprints, Fernando tops the table with 7 DNFs. Bortoleto, Lawson and Sainz all had 5 DNFs each, and Albon and Antonelli had 4 DNFs each. Everyone thought Alonso was far too magic to have this many DNFs, so nobody predicted he'd come out top here. But 5 predicted Bortoleto and so grabbed 6 points. 4 of us said Albon and Rachel said Antonelli, and we all get 2 points. Of the non-scoring answers, Hülkenberg had 3 DNFs alongside Behrman, Gasly, Leclerc and Piastri. Hajar and Stroll had 2 DNFs along with Colapinto, Doohan, Hamilton and Ocon. Verstappen had 1 DNF along with Norris and Yuki. Only George Russell finished every Grand Prix and sprint this year. For the second question, I wanted to know the race with the most DNFs. Australia saw 6 DNFs this year, with Hajar out on the formation lap on his debut, Sainz and Doohan dropping it on the opening lap, with Alonso, Bortoleto and Lawson also all retiring with accident damage later on. The British Grand Prix saw Antonelli, Bortoleto, Colapinto, Hajar and Lawson all failing to finish for 5 DNFs. Miami and Austria tied with 4 DNFs, and Mexico, Brazil and Las Vegas sharing 3 DNFs apiece. 2 people correctly predicted the season opener in Australia for 10 points. Twth had Britain for 6 points, with Coogan Bon with Mexico and Las Vegas respectively for 2 points each. And here are the non-scoring answers. Japan, Belgium, Singapore and Abu Dhabi were the only races this year to see 20 classified finishes, i.e. no DNFs. In the 8th round, I asked you to make your own predictions. Each prediction could earn you up to 16 points. However, if more than one person made the same prediction, you'd have to end up sharing points for that prediction. However, this all worked a little bit too well, because none of you shared any predictions. So instead, I'll just be running through them all in the current standing order. So that's going to start with Timo, who predicted that Colapinto would replace Doohan mid-season and will still outscore Hadjar and Bortoleto by Abu Dhabi. This was false. Benji said that Ferrari gets revolutionised, Red Bull will falter, and Sauber will be put in the coffin. Ferrari didn't really get revolutionised and Red Bull faltered at the beginning, but I still think Ferrari did not really get revolutionised for this season, so I'm going to say that this one was false as well. Bailey said that Oscar Piastri would win Grill the Grid again, and indeed that is true. Valian said that at least 3 drivers will be in contention for the championship in the finale, which was of course also true. Hobnob said that Cadillac would sign Bottas for 2026, which was also true. Meanwhile, Zed said that Max Verstappen will leave Red Bull at the end of the year, which has not happened. RPM Guy said that Fernando would retire at the end of the season, which has also not happened. Meanwhile, Knight said that testing would go poorly for Aston Martin and Red Bull. Well, Aston Martin was slowest and Red Bull completed the fewest laps, so I'm going to say that this was true. Arid said that every driver will score points except Jack Doohan and anyone who does 2 Grand Prix or less this season. Well, Franco Colapinto did more than 2 Grand Prix and also did not score points, so this is false. Kota said that a podium will change hands after the race has ended, and most notably, this did happen when Lando Norris was disqualified for plank wear at the Las Vegas Grand Prix, so this is true. Volp said that a Fen goes squee. Also, the Dutch national anthem will be the most played. Well, unfortunately, due to George, Lando and McLaren, the British national anthem was the most played anthem this year. So this is false. Twth said that an announcement would be made about Christian Horner leaving as Red Bull team principal, which did indeed happen, so this is true. Lee said that Bortoleto would beat Hadjar in the final standings, which is false. Bond said that at least 5 races where Max would force a driver off track in a battle. Max was only officially investigated for forcing another driver off track once and was not given a penalty, as Hamilton elected to not attend the stewards' briefing, therefore I'm going to call this one false as well. Taylor said that Isaac would get kicked halfway through the season. This was indeed false. My own prediction was that Kimi Antonelli would start the season tentatively, middle would be crashy, and then would eclipse George at the end. Now, while I got 2 parts of this correct, in that he did start the season fairly tentatively, did have quite a lot of DNFs in the middle, he didn't really outshine George at the end of the season, so I'm calling this one false. Bo said that the Constructors' Championship is decided before the summer break, but the Drivers' Championship isn't. The Constructors' Championship wasn't actually decided until Singapore, so therefore this is false. Azure said that Max Verstappen would win a race. It's a fairly route one, and it indeed was true, he won 8 of them. Tyan said that Lance Stroll would finish in the season P15 or below in the standings, and Lance indeed finished 16th overall with 33 points. Ocon finished 15th with 38. Raf said that Max Verstappen would have a bad race and end up lapped at some point. Now, Max never actually got lapped in any race where he was classified at the finish, so this is false. The only time he was not on the lead lap at the end was at Austria, where he was taken out by Antonelli on the opening lap. Edison said that Sainz would be the first person to score points in Williams this year, whereas in actual fact Albon scored 10 points at the season opener in Australia, whereas Sainz scored his first point for a 10th place finish at the second race in China, where Albon himself scored 6 points, so this is false. Rachel said that Kimi Antonelli would get a win before George and will get more faster laps than George. Unfortunately, both parts of this are false. George was the only Mercedes driver to win this year, and both George and Kimi earned 3 fastest laps each over the course of 2025. Coog suggested that Max Verstappen will do a swear. I mean, of course he did. And so for the last prediction, Rusty suggested that the F1 First chat would complain about Monaco being boring again, which was, of course, true. Monaco only had 2 overtakes for the entire race this year, one of which involved Russell intentionally cutting the track to get past Albon. And now we move on to the final round. In this final round, it's a simple true-false answer to 6 questions, with all correct answers worth 10 points. So the first question was, all teams would score points this year. 18 of us said that all teams would score points, while 6 said that at least one team wouldn't score. As it happens, every team did score points this year, so therefore this is true. For the second true-false question, I asked whether Fernando Alonso would outscore Nico Hülkenberg. All but one of us said that Fernando would outscore Nico, with only Rusty thinking otherwise, but thanks to Nico's brilliant podium at Silverstone, this turned out a bit closer than any of us might have thought. Therefore, this is actually true. For the third question in this round, I wanted to know whether the winning driver would take 6 or fewer race wins in the season, not including sprints. 3 of you thought that the winner would only get 6 or fewer wins, whereas 21 of us thought it would be more. Lando's wins at Australia, Monaco, Austria, Britain, Hungary, Mexico City and Brazil bring his total to 7, so this is indeed false. For the fourth question in this round, I wanted to know whether the outcome of the Drivers' World Championship would be different if the results from the sprint races are disregarded. 6 of us thought that this would be true, with the other 18 thinking this would be false. The spread of sprint points was fairly tight between Lando, Max and Oscar, so discounting them would not have changed the outcome of the Drivers' World Championship. The only drivers who did benefit from sprint points this year were Hamilton and Alonso. Therefore, the answer to this one is also false. For the fifth question, I wanted to know whether the top 5 in the Constructors' Championship order going into the summer break will be the same as the final order. 3 of us thought the eventual order of the Constructors' Championship would be decided at Hungary, with 21 of you thinking it wouldn't. Indeed, Ferrari slipped from 2nd overall to a distant 4th by the end of the season. Therefore, this is also false. And now for the final question. I wanted to know whether a driver would serve a race ban for exceeding 12 penalty points on their FIA Super Licence this season. 10 of us thought this would be true, whereas 14 thought that nobody would see a race ban for exceeding penalty points. This was of course false. Behrman is in fact the closest, currently sitting on 10 penalty points, all accrued this year. So maybe he'll see a ban next year. And with that, we come to the winners. Let's congratulations to Timo for winning the Prediction Challenge of 2025 with a total score of 306 points. Timo actually took the lead after only the 8th question and never relinquished it all the way through to the end. Coming in second was Bailey with 285 points, and rounding out the podium was Felian with 284 points. Benji was 4th, Hobnob 5th, Knight 6th, RPM Guy 7th, Arid 8th, Zed 9th, Azure 10th, Tuth 11th, Volps 12th, Lee 13th, Bon 14th, Tain 15th, Coaster in 16th, Taylor 17th, Bo 18th, myself and Edison tied on 19th, Raffin 21st, Coog 22nd, Rachel 23rd, and bringing up the rear was Rusty in 24th. So I'd like to thank all of my participants once again for taking part in the Prediction Challenge for 2025. If you would like to take part in the Prediction Challenge for 2026, you can scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description to fill it out and then take part for this year. There's new rules, new regulations. What will be different this year? Let me know. Maybe we'll be our winner next year. Entries close on the end of 25th of January of this year, the day before the closed test starts in Barcelona. Thanks for watching, I've been Sosh, and I hope you have an absolutely lovely rest of your day. Thanks for watching, I've been Sosh, and I hope you have an absolutely lovely rest of your day.